protecting our liberty.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Right to Know, brought to you by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. My name is Andrew Couture. I will be your co-host today, and with me is my friend and co-host, Mary Lotze. Today we have a very interesting topic, two actually very interesting topics to talk about. And with us as our guest is Chief Martineau of the Fitchburg Police Department. Thank you for coming on this evening.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here this evening.
Thank you.
So, Chief, first of all, let's let our viewers get to know you a little bit. Can you give us a very brief summary of your career in the police department?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. I've been part of the city my entire life. I grew up on Elm Street. I was educated in all the Fitchburg public schools, right through Fitchburg High School. I left for college, and I came back from college, and I wanted to be a police officer, and I started my career with the Fitchburg Police Department in 1987. I've been employed as a police officer for the last 31 years in the city, and for the last 3.5 years now, I've led the department as its chief of police.
And Chief, I have to say you're doing a fantastic job.
I appreciate that.
It's remarkable to think of somebody having spent their whole career in the city of Fitchburg, where you grew up. That's nice.
It's a special city.
It is.
It really is.
It is.
Well, tonight we're going to be discussing two topics. First of all, one topic that is impacting city and towns in Massachusetts and throughout the nation is the opioid crisis. Secondly, we're going to discuss mental health issues around one person's civil constitutional right to own a firearm in light of the recent mass shooting incidents. We're going to begin with the opioid crisis. Chief, when did Fitchburg specifically and other cities and towns begin to realize there was a growing problem with abuse of opioids?
You know, I've been asked that question before, and it's hard to give an exact date and time. You know, we started seeing a fluctuation in the numbers surrounding opiate-related overdose and deaths around 2012. But I really believe it dates back further than 2012. Around 2006 and 2007, at the Fitchburg Police Department, we started a new regimen of training for our police officers in the treatment of mental health and de-escalation techniques, and we started focusing on how to deal with a person in a different avenue. So I think we were dealing with what we're seeing now early on in 2006 and 2007, but truly the opiate epidemic exploded right around 2012 and 13 when we started seeing significant jumps in numbers. For instance, I looked up some statistics for this evening. In 2012, the city of Fitchburg reported 5 suspected deaths of overdose due to opiates. That number has risen drastically. Last year we reported 18 deaths in the city, and that was 2016. And now for 2017, we can't classify them deaths until they're released as deaths, but we're estimating somewhere around 25 deaths in the city. So if you look at 25 deaths in 2017 dating back to 2012, that's a significant increase in people that have lost their life to an addiction.
Yeah. Well, how does that compare to, say, Springfield or Worcester or Boston, some of the bigger cities?
You know what, it's right across the board. One thing we've learned very quickly, addiction has no boundaries, whether it's an urban city, whether it's a city with crime issues, or if it's a city with a lot of higher-end homes. Really, there's no boundaries when it comes to overdose and opiates and addiction itself. You know, some of that brought it into the spotlight. A lot of people compare the opiate crisis to the cocaine crisis in the early 80s, and it was labeled as a specific disease to a specific race and class, which it truly wasn't. And now, 20, 30 years later, we're looking at it much differently, where this is an addiction, this is a health issue, and it took us a long time to get to this point, but that's how now it's being addressed. And truly, we're in the middle of a major crisis.
Back when, I just want to ask one question, Andrew, on that. Back when you first started seeing these numbers and you started witnessing it through overdose and even deaths, did you also notice like a suspicious increase in crime and theft and, you know, some of those things that go along with?
Some would say that there's a correlation between it. I'm careful not to do that, because one of the first challenges in law enforcement, when we really recognized we were into this crisis, the first challenge, probably the most important challenge, was to break the stigma of addiction. You can't just correlate that addiction equals criminal activity equals a bad person. It's not that way. So we had to refocus the way we were looking at addiction. Is it true that there's ancillary crimes with it? Sure, someone that has an addiction, they need to feed their addiction. They may be stealing stuff, they may be stealing items from loved ones, pawning stuff. So in the early on stages in 2012, before I was chief, I was the commander of our detective unit. In 2012-13, we were seeing huge increases in home breaks, possession of stolen property. 2012-13, I was very fortunate where I instituted the pawnbroker reporting system, which helped to alleviate some of that criminal activity. But we started at an early stage where, yeah, it was feeding some criminal activity, but more importantly, it was important for us to recognize it as an addiction and not just as a criminal matter.
Death, something that would cause death.
Absolutely,
If not kept in check.
absolutely.
Now, how do you see this problem, Chief, as a law enforcement issue, a social issue regarding issues such as unemployment, broken homes? I mean, what exactly do you correlate the
Oh, that's easy.
rise?
All of the above. Absolutely all of the above. Unfortunately, law enforcement's the front line. We have the boots on the ground. We're being called at all times of the day to address whether it's a family issue, a mental health issue, and most of the times it's either fueled by a mental health illness or some type of addiction. So, you know, what you just described, it's all of the above. And it's almost impossible to try to put a finger on one more than the other.
And how can we stop this abuse? I mean, frequent response is that we can't arrest our way out of the crisis.
Yeah, I absolutely love that statement, because 3 years ago I would have subscribed to that we can't arrest our way out of this situation. But I've really changed the way I've looked at it, and just in the last year or so, that sometimes you have to arrest your way out of it. There's so much good work happening at the Community Correction Center through the Sheriff's Department. You know, there's certain people that reach a stage in addiction that they need some guidance. And usually guidance is forced upon them through some type of an arrest. So, yeah, I mean, at the early stages of the addiction and the crisis issue, we were quick to say we can't arrest our way out of it, because we were trying to get rid of the stigma that this was a crime activity. And then as we go along 2, 3, 4 years and the numbers continue to rise and the overdoses arise, you know, we're looking at it a little differently. So I think a combination between a strong court system, I'm a strong proponent of drug courts, some type of diversion out of the court system, but have that hanging over their head. And then with programs like the Sheriff's Department and the Community Corrections, there's a certain group of people who are battling addiction that need that type of structure.
Yeah. You and I first met, and I asked you to be on our show. It was at a Health Alliance task force, on the opioid task force. And I was actually surprised that night when one of the things that you had talked about was the need to have everybody who is a user, an abuser, family members, friends, people who come in contact with substance abusers or opioid abusers, that Narcan needs to be prolific. It needs to be in everybody's hands. Is that a way to help solve this problem, or is that just to help keep people living longer so we can get other interventions in place?
That's a great question. It's not going to solve the problem, but it's going to give someone a fighting chance to live another day to finally beat their addiction. Narcan is truly a life-saving drug. I've seen it firsthand. I've seen people brought back from life. Brought back from death. Every Fitchburg police officer carries Narcan. Every cruiser, every police officer in the city has Narcan. Our fire department, our ambulances, we all carry Narcan. Just to give you some statistics, last year in 2017, Fitchburg police officers, not including our medics and our members of the fire department, but just Fitchburg police officers administered Narcan in the city of Fitchburg last year 87 times.
Wow.
Now think about that for a second. 87 Narcan deployments, which could have been 87 deaths. You add that to the 25, I mean, we have some issues.
Yeah.
So you can see with that life-saving drug, we had the ability to save someone's life 87 times and hope that we can take them to the next level for that first level of treatment, try to get them in the right direction, going in the right direction to finally overcome this addiction.
How do people get Narcan? People out there watching this show who know somebody who has a problem, how do you get it? Do you need a doctor's prescription?
No, you don't. You can go to any pharmacy, you can go to Walmart, you can go to CVS, and you can ask for a thing of Narcan.
And another thing you mentioned is that they're now double doses. Maybe
we use a single dose. No, you're saying it correct. It's a single dose. It's as simple as undoing the cap and it's one spray in the nostril, but it is a double dose compared to the older version of Narcan that we had.
So people really need to get on board with these things. And the second thing I heard was very important was to get peer counselors involved as early as possible.
Yeah, you call them peer counselors, I call them recovery coaches. Those are the people that I call them the boots on the ground. These are people that, for the most part, have already dealt with their addiction and they've been successful. There's no better step in the right direction for recovery, and it begins with peer counseling, recovery coaches. That's the first step in the level, because there's different levels of addiction and how you treat someone. There's not one shoe size fits all, because there is different levels of addiction, and that's the importance behind the recovery coach getting on board immediately. We're very fortunate where we have a relationship with the district attorney, and a couple of years ago the district attorney approached me and asked if we wanted to partner with him in a pilot program utilizing AdCare out of Worcester. And we were 2 years into this crisis, and quite frankly, I was going all over the state looking for best practices to bring back to the city of Fitchburg. And this is exactly where the best practices were leading. It was similar to the PARI method that you were seeing out of Gloucester. This was utilizing a recovery coach immediately upon overdose and getting this recovery coach immediately to the ER so they can have an intervention with this person that's in crisis immediately. So we partnered with AdCare in the district attorney's office, and we've been providing that services for the last couple of years, where addiction recovery coaches heading directly to the hospital upon an overdose. Notifications.
What about safe injection sites? This is kind of hitting.
It's a hot topic. No,
that's easy.
I can't say it any other way. This is an illegal drug. It's going to remain an illegal drug. I'm not going to promote it. I'm about saving life, and I am adamantly against injection sites.
Yeah. Well, Chief, being an attorney, what should somebody do if they come upon a person who's suffering from an overdose, other than if you're carrying Narcan? Of course, you'd have to be trained how to use it. There's always concern for the Good Samaritan who may be sued.
Sure.
But there are laws that will help, somebody who's coming to the rescue, Good Samaritan laws.
Absolutely.
What happens if the victim dies or otherwise injured? Can you discuss how the Good Samaritan changes may make people rethink their response?
Yep. I want the listeners and the watchers tonight to know that if you take action and someone's in crisis, they're overdosing, under the Good Samaritan law, you're going to be commended for your actions. You're not going to be persecuted for your actions. You're saving another human's life. And that was exactly what the state of Massachusetts did when they enacted the Good Samaritan law, specifically following guidelines for 94C violations. If you're helping someone in a crisis, you're not going to be held liable. Same theory as it was around first responders when we respond to take action, where we're not held liable for what's happening. There is a chance someone may die, and that's a fact of life. However, we don't want the general public to feel afraid that they can't help this person. And administering Narcan, as I said before, is so simple. It's just it's one shot nostril, and there is really no training. If you can unpackage it, you can use it.
Okay. Well, we're about halfway through our show, so we're going to start in on the next topic. To the crisis of school and other mass shootings. Recently, I bring up Parkland, Florida High School in February, and earlier a shooting at the high-rise hotel in Vegas to innocent concert-goers. Excuse me. Many believe that the common denominator is the availability of guns. Others believe that it's unrecognized, unreported, untreated mental illness. Where do you think you stand on this topic? What is the common denominator for this?
Similar to the opioid crisis, I don't know if there is one common denominator when it comes to gun violence. You know, our hearts went out when we saw the Parkland case come about. I remember saying to myself, oh, not again. You know, Sandy Hook is still in the back of our minds, and Las Vegas was still in the back of our minds, and it's senseless death. But there's many contributing factors. Obviously, it's the weapon that is firing the bullets that are killing people. It's the person holding the weapon who may have an undiagnosed mental health condition, may have unknown classified medical issues. We just don't know. In every case, it's something different. So there's many contributing factors, and you just can't single one factor over another. That's what makes cases like this so concerning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, specifically, I mean, it's the person behind the gun that's doing the illegal act, not the actual firearm itself.
Yeah. A firearm never killed anybody by itself. There's usually some action that puts it in play. But that being said, there's steps that government can do to hopefully reduce this.
Well, one of the questions that I had, and Parkland was just, probably, except from Sandy Hook, your heart just went out when, you're right, not again. And that there were multiple opportunities of law enforcement at all levels to have stopped this or somehow prevented it, whether it be the FBI, whether it be the local police, I mean, something. Do you believe, as a local city police chief, that our police forces have the training, we have the manpower, the personnel to investigate these things before they happen, every nuance that happens in your community, to intervene?
Simply put, yes to your question. You know, I don't want to second guess what law enforcement did in Florida, the state of Florida. I, like everybody else, watched the news, heard the reports of the miscues here and there. What did jump out at me when I was watching the media report the miscues, a lot of the miscues were directed at a much higher level, where they were sending information to the FBI or some federal agency. You know, what I like to tell people, if you have information that's going on right here in our hometown, you need to report it to your local authorities. Things don't get lost as easily when you're dealing with a police department in your local community, because we have personal interest on what takes place in our communities. Like I said, I don't want to second judge what happened in Parkland. That's the worst thing you can do. The worst thing you can do is Monday morning quarterback it and say this should have happened, this should have happened. We need to learn from our mistakes and determine what we can do better in the next situation. What I can say is information that comes into a local level becomes very personal. And when it becomes personal, attention is given to it.
Do you feel you have good relationships with the school districts, the school principals, the guidance counselors, and all that? If I were to be just perusing Facebook and saw somebody writing things like, I want to shoot up a high school, like what happened in this case, that we should just call?
Absolutely. We have the best relationship with Superintendent Ravenel and our approach towards school safety. And since Parkland, before Parkland, we had a great relationship. I can tell you, since Parkland, we have expanded well beyond and taking a much more aggressive look at security measures in all our public schools. I'm very fortunate to have a partner like Superintendent Ravenel and his concern and care for the safety of our children in our public schools. Additionally, we have the same type of relationship with Superintendent Harity up at Monty Tech. You know, and let's not forget, we have other schools in our community.
Yeah.
We have the Sizer School, we have Appleweld, we have St. Bernard's High School,
Right.
we have St. Bernard's Elementary School. We are involved in all of those buildings, and we discuss safety plans, we do safety drills. It's up to us. It's up to us as a community to provide the safety for all our school children, and that's something that we take very seriously and that we're constantly evaluating and planning for.
Well, Chief, I mean, there's also, you know, school resource officers that are at the schools. But there's been a lot of call about arming teachers.
Yes,
where
it has.
there are some people who are absolutely, completely against it, and there are people like me who are willing to consider the option, you know, for the safety of our kids. I mean,
Right.
we you know, protect our politicians, we check our, you know, athletes, we protect our Hollywood stars,
Yeah.
all with firearms, with people who have firearms. Why can't we protect our kids with the same thing?
Well, I'm one of those people that are totally against arming teachers. I think our teachers have a hard enough job as it is to impart so much information to our students in a productive manner where they can give those children what they deserve as an education. To give that extra responsibility to a teacher to have a firearm and have it properly, it's not fair to the teacher. I can't say enough about a robust school resource officer program. And currently in our city, I have a full-time school resource officer assigned to Fitchburg High School. I have a full-time school resource officer assigned to Longjo Middle School. I have a full-time resource officer assigned to Monty Tech. Starting in September of this new school year, I'm adding 2 additional school resource officers, one to cover Memorial and the 4th to do a floater into our elementary schools. So I'm going to have a team of 5 school resource officers starting in September. And we're not just going to be looking at Fitchburg Public Schools. Like I told you, we work closely with the St. Bernard's and the Sizes and the Monty Tech. So we're going to really expand what we do here in the city with our SRO program.
Is the school resource officer an actual police personnel? Okay.
Yes, they're sworn law enforcement. They have specialized training that's one step above the patrolman when it comes to different issues they may encounter at the school. They do additional training in mental health first aid. They do additional training in crisis intervention. So what you're getting as a school resource officer is two-handed. You have sworn local law enforcement that's armed, that is instructed to take action upon crisis. And they also have the ability to make observations in the school of something that might not just be right. That, you know, that police officer's there. He's not focused with teaching algebra. He's focused with being the liaison to the school, assuring safety in that school. So all the studies across the country is a robust SRO program is paramount for school safety. I know there's a push out of Washington next year for the COPS hiring grant. They're suggesting an increase of 50% hiring under the COPS hiring grant specifically for school resource officers. I've had a great commitment from Mayor DeNatale in our city council to continue to have a robust program. So we're very fortunate that we have the backing from our elected officials between the mayor and the city council. And like I said, the relationship I have with Superintendent Ravenel is second to none. And when you have that type of relationship, only positive things can come from it.
So the next topic that I kind of want to get into, being an attorney who specializes in firearms law, I get a lot of questions in regards to the process of getting your license to carry, not just in Fitchburg, but also, you know, statewide. Can we let our viewers know the process is pretty similar in all cities? Not exactly. There are a lot of differences depending on the bigger cities. But what changes would be time frames?
Sure. Well, the standard form to obtain a license to carry or an FID card, it's a standard form that you can get on mass.gov. That is going to be identical amongst all 364 communities in the state of Massachusetts. Where things start to differ is department to department on how they handle the background investigations, how they approach it. So when you go on mass.gov and you get an application for a firearms license, the very first thing you need to do is you need, depending on what type of license you want, you have to take a safety course. To obtain a LTC, a license to carry, you have to take a safety course, and there's a list of different safety courses on mass.gov that you can take. If you're inquiring just to get an FID card, you don't have to go through the full safety course, but you still have to do a hunter's safety course. So you're going to have to provide local law enforcement those two documents even before you apply. So that's the very first step in the process. Second step in the process is filling out this application, and that's when, here in the city, what we do in the city of Fitchburg, I have a full-time detective that part of his duties is to review all license requests for firearms and FIDs. It's not that way in every city and town because of constraints, budgetary constraints. They may not have a detective do it. They may have a civilian do it. We're very fortunate that I can provide a detective to do this because a detective brings a certain skill set to the application process where they're interviewing the potential candidate, and the detective can usually pick up some cues that may not be able to be picked up by a civilian. So that's an important part of the process, is the communication between the detective and the potential applicant. And at that point, once the application's filled out and we have the certificates that they've gone through their training, that's when my detective does a very extensive background check to include Corey check, a border probation check. We check records with the Department of Mental Health. We look at the entire candidate. And once we go through that, the detective will make a recommendation to me whether we should consider this person for a license to carry or there may be a disqualifier. For the listening audience, there's certain disqualifiers that are automatic. If you have a felony on your record, you're not getting a license to carry. Simple as that. Any violent crime, you're not going to, it's a disqualifier. You won't get that license. There's certain misdemeanors that carry a jail time over 2.5 years. One example of a misdemeanor would be an OUI. If you have those on your record since 1993, they're potential disqualifiers. I've had some cases come in front of me that were borderline disqualifiers, and I looked at the total application package and I said, you know what, this is a responsible gun owner, and I've sent that application in, stamped, approved, Chief of Police, into Boston, and it's come back and they've rejected it.
Oh, okay.
And sometimes that's a little discouraging because Boston does have the authority to overstep my authority and say, no, we're not going to give this license. This is one part of my job that weekly I spend hours upon, that it's not frustrating, but I take it very, very serious because at the end of the day, I'm stamping my name and my title on this report, and I'm giving someone the authority to purchase a firearm.
I know we're running out of time, and so I want to just briefly go through something we were talking about before. And you said Massachusetts really has a very strict surveillance of this, and this is not just you and in Fitchburg and
Yes.
with Detective Daigle, but really Massachusetts as a state.
Absolutely. Massachusetts leads the nation, once again, in gun background checks and gun licensing laws. It's one of the strictest in the entire country. In fact, recently in the news, Governor Baker is entering into agreement with some other New England states to create a relationship, a collaboration with Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and New York, where we're all going to share information together. The key to true gun reform is going to be a national standard where information sharing happens among all 50 states, not just in Massachusetts. So when I have an application and someone has come into the city of Fitchburg from Missouri, I'm going to have information sharing with Missouri when it comes to that. Like I said, Massachusetts, we have been leading the nation on many different fronts, and it's no different with our gun programs.
And the one other question that I have on this is that if someone has a gun, they have a weapon, they have firearms in their home, they have a lawful license, but if for some reason they should commit a crime or get involved in drugs or whatever, mental health illness, you can actually go in and stop that right in the just nip it right there and
Immediately.
take the weapons and the license.
I have the authority, just like I have the authority to issue a license, I have the authority to suspend a license immediately. And we do that quite frequently. Someone's in trouble with the law, I'm made a notification of it, I suspend their license. Police chiefs have a great responsibility, and we have a lot of authority with licensing and issuing firearms. I have a suitability clause where I can determine if someone is suitable, and it's my opinion that they may or may not be suitable. Obviously, there's due process. As an attorney, you understand that if I declare someone unsuitable, they still have the right to appeal. But like I said, Massachusetts is leading the way, and it's encouraging that we're expanding beyond Massachusetts through other New England states.
Well, Chief, we could go in for hours, but
I
unfortunately...
feel bad. We feel rushed.
Unfortunately, we are completely out of time.
I know. Well, you know what? Invite me back.
Absolutely.
I have a feeling we will do that.
Because we could make this an hour show.
We definitely could.
Easily.
Too many things to talk about. We've run out of time.
I know.
But I definitely want to thank you for coming tonight.
Absolutely my pleasure.
And this has been wonderful to have you and your insight and everything, your knowledge. I will still close because maybe we can do a little editing. We will thank you for watching Your Right to Know and sitting in here tonight with the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. As we leave, we want you to remember that your local and city or town Republican Committee is your only grassroots organization that supports and holds dear your liberty, your constitutional rights, and your conservative values. We encourage you to join us. Why? Because to us, the GOP stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity for all people, and because we always stand for freedom. Thank you and good night.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might.